The conversation about gender parity has shifted dramatically. The gender pay gap, sexual harassment across a wide range of sectors, and the lack of female directors on boards, the headlines are catching up to workplace realities. And while there are many more women than ever leading influential arts institutions, the world's top 20 most visited art museums can boast only 3 female directors. And given that the vast majority of art museum curators are women, I think there's clearly room for improvement. And so for many of you who've been to the previous 2 events, I think you're no doubt aware, and we're all, I see quite a lot of Courtauld alumni in the audience, and I think this community is very aware of the pivotal role that the Courtauld plays in terms of educating the next generation of art museum curators and leaders. And also, you know, our graduate list of alumni is quite storied and very accomplished. And tonight, happily, 2 of the 4 speakers are among those ranks of alumni. But given that the Courtauld is deeply committed to furthering the careers of its graduates, and the fact that over 70% of Courtauld alumni are female, I think it's really fitting that the Courtauld should be hosting this kind of conversation. And of course, diversity in the art world really does go beyond gender parity. And in the 2 previous Gender Matter events, we touched on the really pressing issue of ensuring that the staffing of our museums reflects the real world outside the 4 walls of our arts institutions. And the events addressed in these 2 previous, or the issues addressed in these 2 previous events were really firstly, why does gender parity in the art world matter? And in the second event, we asked the question of, well, how can we achieve it? And this 3rd event is much more personal in nature. So we're delighted to welcome 4 impressive arts professionals to the stage. And they're going to be describing their individual journeys and paths to leadership. And each of them are going to speak for 15 minutes, and then we're going to open the floor to questions. And I'd also like to remind you that there's wine served at the end of all of this, so you get a little prize for making it through to the end. And so we're going to have, as I say, 4 speakers, and in order, they're going to be Jennifer Scott, who has been Sackler Director of the Dulwich Picture Gallery since April of 2017. I think we get to say happy anniversary to you then, Jennifer. She was formerly Director of the Holborn Museum in Bath, where she managed the museum's centenary celebrations and a series of acclaimed exhibitions, as well as citywide partnerships and a successful £450,000 acquisition campaign, as well as links to community engagement programs. Before that, she was Curator of Paintings at the Royal Collections Trust between 2004 and 2014, and Jennifer completed both her BA and her MA at the Courtauld. She'll be followed by Amanda Nevill, the Chief Executive Officer of the BFI Across the Waters, the lead organization of film and moving image in the UK, and a distributor of lottery funds for the screen industries, and previously head of the National Museum of Photography, Film, and Television in Bradford. And she joined the BFI in 2003 and holds honorary doctorates from Bradford University, Bradford College, and the University of York, and was awarded a CBE in 2015. Amanda will be followed by Hilary Carty, Director of the Clore Leadership Program, a role she took up in autumn 2017 after 6 years as a consultant, facilitator, and coach, specializing in leadership development, management, and organizational change. Prior to working independently, Hilary was the director of the Cultural Leadership Program, which was a £22 million government-supported investment in excellence in leadership within the UK cultural sector. And our final speaker is Kaywin Feldman, who is the director and president of the Minneapolis Institute of Art, where she oversees a museum staff of 250 people, a fine art collection of over 89,000 objects in a 473,000 square foot facility, which I understand is soon to get bigger, and an annual operating budget of $32 million. She previously served as the director of the Memphis Brooks Museum of Art in Tennessee from 1999 to 2007, and received an honorary doctorate of fine arts from the Memphis College of Art in 2008. She received her MA in History of Art from the Courtauld, and an MA also from the Institute of Archaeology at the University of London. So we have tonight what I'm calling a Courtauld sandwich, because we're starting with Jennifer and we're ending with Kaywin, and we're in no doubt that we're in very good hands with these four speakers. So I'd like to welcome our first speaker, Jennifer, to the stage.
I really feel something when I'm here at the Courtauld, and it's the memory of so many happy times. It's also the memory of learning such a massive lesson. I was so sure when I got into the Courtauld as an undergraduate, so I was here for my BA and my MA, and I was so sure when I got that letter that I'd been accepted, that that was going to be it for me. I knew it, I felt it. I was going to get to come here and study with those lecturers whose works I had read. And I thought, I'm going to leave after 3 years as a well-rounded, perfect art historian. And I felt so excited about it. And it was in my very first lecture here when I came running up those stairs. You know what it's like when you're slightly late and you're running up the stairs and you're out of breath. And Robin Cormack was giving the first talk of the survey series. And I sat through that lecture and I barely understood one word of what he said. And I thought it might take a little bit longer than 3 years. And that stays with you because this place is so formative, and it actually teaches you how to know what you don't know. And the day, for me, the day you stop learning is the day that you stop everything, surely. And that memory of learning that lesson is the thing that makes this place so special. And for those of you who are still students here, you'll see this throughout your life when you're at a party on the other side of the world and somebody comes over and says, "Weren't you at the Courtauld?" It just gives that little flutter of familiarity. This place feels like such a family. It's a really, really special thing indeed. So thank you for welcoming me here and on a subject that is so close to my heart. I am director of Dulwich Picture Gallery. Again, as a student here, I never thought I'd stand here and say that. How wonderful. I'm director of Dulwich Picture Gallery. How lucky I am. And before that, I was director of the Holborn Museum in Bath. And before that, I was able to work for 10 years as curator of paintings at the Royal Collection. And before that, I worked at the National Gallery. And before that, I worked at National Museums Liverpool. For me, all of those moments in my career sort of blur together. I was thinking in preparing for this evening, is there somebody I could stand here tonight and say it all changed for me when I met this person, or when somebody else said this other thing, or when I didn't get that crucial job? And actually it's not like that. It all just blurs together in this continuous journey of learning and understanding things, not only just about myself, but about art, about the importance of art in this world that seems to be getting crazier by the minute. So the importance of believing in that and the role that we play in opening up culture to as many people as possible. All of that is constantly in flux for me, so that I can't stand here and say there is one particular person. But there is for me a phrase that always lingers, and it's something that I grew up with. It was, as a child, my dad had a little vase that he had inherited from his aunt, from my great auntie. And on it, in really crude writing, was written this slogan: "Success comes not by wishing, but by hard work bravely done." And I grew up with that motto. My dad used to tell it me all the time when I failed my driving test, for instance. I remember particularly that conversation of the success comes not by wishing, but by hard work bravely done. You might have imagined yourself passing that test, Jenny, but you didn't, did you? Oh, it never goes away, does it? But that motto, particularly growing up with it and seeing it on this little ceramic vase thing, so I can picture it as well. It stays with me almost like a little motto running around my head, like the sound of a train. Success comes not by wishing, but by hard work bravely done. And I think back to it so many times. There's two parts of it, really. The first part, the not by wishing part. I've lived through that so much, and I know I've got more of it to come. The point where you think, see me. You're going for that job, and you think, just see me, please, see me. Know what I'm about. Please interview me. Why won't you pick up the phone and call me? I need this. I'm exactly right for this. And it doesn't happen. Those times when you're desperately wanting somebody to be proactive for you, And then the hardship that comes with the realization that nobody's going to do it. Nobody's really going to do it, not for the aims and the ends that you have personally at your own heart. Because it doesn't happen like that. You have good fortune, and you have people who help you, but it only really works if you then leverage that yourself. And I find it still, I forget it still. And then you'll have that moment when you think, okay, that was a door that was just opened a little bit, but I need to do that. I can't just wish that to open up fully and to be projected and get my Oscar or whatever the equivalent might be. It's making it happen yourself, not by wishing it. And I think as a room of creative people, we know wishing so well. I know my Oscar speech, my goodness, it's a knockout. But it's not the way that it works, is it? It's not like that. And we need reminders of it all the time. And we need to fall flat on our face quite often. It's back to the same thing. You don't come out of the Courtauld as a perfect art historian. You fall and you trip, and then some people point out what you could have done differently. And then if you work at it and think it through and try something different, then you continue getting better at something. So not by wishing. It's really, really important. But the bravely done thing, that's one of my favourite words, brave. Oh, to be brave. Because the bravery of the thing can be quite lonely. And I think if we're thinking about that motto, for me personally, since I was invited on this topic here this evening, if we open it up, the motto, success in the art world comes not by wishing, but by hard work bravely done. And then for the purposes of tonight and for life in general, let's add in success as a woman in the art world comes not by wishing, but by hard work bravely done. And I'm not being glib about that. And I know people in life have challenges in all different forms. But there are moments as a woman wanting to be a leader when things trip you up that you would have never seen coming. And it's that bravery of believing in it and not having your confidence knocked too much and getting back up and saying, okay, well, that door has been quite firmly slammed in my face, but let's keep going and let's not hide in a room for a week and sob. Let's just keep going. Let's reconfigure. That takes so much bravery, and I see it around me in female colleagues constantly. People who just knock me flying by the sheer bravery of what gets them out of bed in the mornings. And for me, it's, for instance, at Dulwich Picture Gallery, our head of learning, who's been working recently on a project with refugee teenagers, working with socially isolated older women. So, for instance, I witnessed a Syrian 17-year-old working with an 80-year-old woman from Bermondsey who hadn't had a conversation with somebody else for 5 months. And they came together in Dulwich Picture Gallery and worked with a photographer to take photographs of each other. And the thing that united them was the anger that there weren't portraits of women on the walls of Dulwich Picture Gallery. So they were both incensed at all of these men, particularly Dutch 17th century men, which actually I'm very, very fond of, but Dutch 17th century men, and they're saying, where on earth are the women? Let's make some women then, let's take photographs of each other, quick, let's learn how to take photographs, then let's take these photographs. And then we hung the photographs in the gallery, and it was so powerful. Well, for me, the bravery of the women in doing that is amazing. The bravery of our head of learning who pushed this project and pushed the agenda, and we didn't have the money for it, and so she went out with our fundraising team and raised the money to do it and made it happen, and then got our comms team so excited about it they came in on a weekend to make sure we got all the right social media to back it up. That kind of bravery is so exciting, and I think all of us know women like that who will push something so far because they trust in what they have at their heart as a vision of how it could work. So success as a woman in the art world comes not by wishing, but by hard work bravely done. But there's a key word in this motto that I haven't touched on, and I will just briefly. The first word, success. Because what do we really mean by success? I'm now director of an art gallery. How fantastic. But I don't get out of bed in the mornings and just pat myself on the back and think, that's it, I've done it now. I could just sit back and let everybody else do the work for me. What does success mean for me? It means constantly feeling challenged, constantly feeling like there's something else to do. There's never a finished job. There's never a perfect publication or a project. There's never a perfect fundraising project. It's constantly growing and developing and setting new targets. But that's success for me. I think in general terms, we have the idea, the notion of success rammed down our throats constantly, but in quite an ephemeral way, quite a vapid way. Is fame success? Is beauty success? Or is it actually people achieving their personal goals? For me, the personal is so, so important. The bravery of putting yourself in a project, making yourself a little bit vulnerable, allowing, say, creativity to touch on something that really makes you feel something. Not that's perfect and shiny and has all the allure of something that is magnificent, but something that is actually real and human and perhaps flawed, because then that might then open up something new to somebody who had never even thought they would encounter such a thing. That, for me, is what success is, when people trust in themselves. And I think something that's I've come across time and time again is other people's notions of who I am. I've been told quite a lot in my life who I am, what my personality is, what I should be, what I can't be, what I might be if I only tried harder. And you can be pulled from pillar to post by other people's expectations of success. And actually, for me, true success is when you trust in that inner voice, that integrity at your very core, that says, for me, I think I can lead. I think I'd like to make things happen. I'd like to lead a team. I'd like to run a gallery. I'd like to make sure that art really can change people's lives. And listening to that and then putting a bit of Jenny in there for me is really, really important. Not then going and getting the manual on how to run an art gallery perfectly, but instead thinking, what does that look like for me? And then opening that out. That then hopefully allows other people to think, well, let me put a bit of myself in this, and then we get something that's truly creative and exciting. And if you think of all the best paintings in the world, those are the ones that are great, not the paint-by-numbers stuff, the ones where people actually put in some raw emotion, when they actually dare to do something new and possibly even fail. Think of Joshua Reynolds, what mistakes he made with his techniques, but he dared to try something new, and that's really exciting. So I think defining success for ourselves in a very personal way, for me, is really important. And daring through all of that, not to try and do it alone. You've got your inner voice, you've got your own idea of what success looks like to you, but then being brave enough to ask the right questions. So rather than sitting waiting for that phone call to come with somebody offering you the dream job, actually thinking, what's the right questions that could help me to get there? Who do I know? Who do I look up to? Who do I respect? How can I ask for their help? Being vulnerable enough to say, I can't do this on my own. And then if you get there, never saying, I did this on my own. It's actually the idea that constantly we can learn from each other, share, collaborate, open up doors for each other, celebrate each other's successes, and ask the right questions. Then that, I think, is how we can achieve that motto. Success comes not by wishing, but by hard work, bravely done. Thank you very much.
The great thing about the subject matter on being invited sort of to lead your own agenda and talk a little bit about leadership is I suspect all of us are going to come at it from different angles. And it is something that I've always been really fascinated by, and I'm sort of coming towards the end of my formal career now. I've got a few more years left, but not that many. And I'm going to go on and do some things that I want to do. But it does mean that I'm able to look back and really reflect on how the workplace has changed. I mean, I started out really in the early 80s, and boy has it changed since that time, and I just wanted to share a bit with you. So when we complain, and indeed in the arena in which I work in film and television, that we still have a very high mountain to climb, boy oh boy, it is so less steep than it was back then. I absolutely usually promise you don't start with quotes, but a colleague found this quote for me and I had to say it because it's so apt for what I really want to talk about. And it comes from somebody called D.D. Myers, who was a press secretary in the White House under the Clinton era. But she said, "I'm endlessly fascinated that playing football is considered a training ground for leadership, but raising children isn't." And I think that's really, really important. The first thing is that, you know, when I started in the workplace, you would never, ever admit ever to having children. I mean, it's just not allowed. So I started work in the 80s, and you can sort of picture what it was like in the workplace by actually looking at what was happening on the television at that time. And there were two things going on. So on one side you had Dallas. So this was the era of, you've got it, women. You had big shoulder pads, you had big head, you had a stiletto, and with a flash of your cleavage, the deal was done. And then you would turn over on the other side, you have Felicity Kendall. And there she was planting her vegetables and her potatoes, and she was making these corn dollies, and she was a real earth mother. And so even at that time, there was this great confusion about, what was a woman's role, and where should we be? Were we supposed to be sort of earth mothers, or were we supposed to be these extraordinary women wearing power gear and stuff? And again, I have to say that in the 80s, and Emma Thompson said this quite recently, sorry to name drop, but she said she never thought that she would still be talking about the women's issue today. And I never thought that either, because in the 80s, we thought we'd cracked it. We really did. I mean, I was wearing those shoulder pads, I was wearing those stiletto heels, and I was out there, doing all that stuff, because we thought the world was ours. But that duality actually played out, I think, in lots of other areas of work at that time. So there was never a comfortable place to be. There was even an expression, wasn't there, which I don't hear very much nowadays, but when you get to work, you were supposed to leave your home life behind you, and when you got home, you're supposed to leave your work life behind you. But actually, if you are a mother or a parent, that's an absolute fantasy. It's a sort of plastic existence, and it's great to see so many women here, some of you who will be, at the beginning of your careers. And I hope that if you get nothing else from what I say today, you get a sense of confidence that actually you absolutely need to juggle both those roles, because to be fulfilled at the end of the day, you need to be able to choose to do that, and you absolutely can. I mean, I know that when my kids were young, there was never a really comfortable place to be. So when I was at work, I was always slightly anxious, were they all right? Was the childcare okay? Were they going to be picked up or whatever? And when I was at home, I was always thinking, oh shit, I should have worked harder at work, and I hope I don't lose my job because da-da-da. And what this led to was masses of overcompensating, which still to this day makes me laugh, and it makes my children are very grown up now, perfectly well balanced, thank God. It makes them laugh as well, because when they were little, they just were not allowed to be ill, because you couldn't possibly go into work and say, I'm sorry, I've got a sick child, I can't come in today. And so they would come down, looking pale, and one having vomited all night, and they could barely make it out of the front door. So you'll be fine, darling, you'll be fine. Here, have an aspirin. And then by the time they were 14, I was so guilty. The weight of guilt was sort of reducing my actual height, and so they'd come down looking slightly pale, and I'd say, take a week off. So I'm pretty convinced that my children from about the age of 14 to 18 didn't really go to school much at all. And this did lead to some amusing times, because my youngest daughter was she's actually very clever, but she was a real tearaway. And I used to go to the parents' evenings, always arrived at the last minute. Every other mother was there. I'd arrived looking red and, dripping with sweat and anxious, and couldn't work out which teacher I was supposed to be seeing. But my eldest daughter, and this is where I'm going to sound a bit like Hyacinth's Bouquet, she was the first one in our family to go to university. I haven't got any qualifications. And she's a lawyer. My daughter's a lawyer. Big success, tick. But my youngest daughter was a tearaway, and at the parents' evenings for my eldest daughter, I'd come out feeling, 10 foot tall, and I'd go in for the parents' evenings for my youngest daughter, and they were absolutely terrible. And I think being practical in life is a good thing, because I thought, actually, she's going to be fine. So I said, darling, do you mind if I just don't do parents' evening anymore? And she said, no, Mum, that's fine. So I said, okay, I thought that's out of the way. And then she came down a bit later, she said, should we send Granny? I said, great idea. So we sent Granny. So, my message number 2 is, when you are a hard-working woman and the guilt really gets you and you can't make parents' evening, either don't go or send the Granny. But this has really led to how I am in the workplace, and because I know what it's like, and I am really, really inclusive in that workplace, because I don't believe that you have two different sorts of personalities or two different existences. And as a leader, I'm really interested in the whole person, and my colleagues know that I'm really interested in the whole person. So in meetings at the BFI, in the same sentence, we can go from the stunning deficit to the problems with childcare in the same sentence, and that's perfectly all right. I think it's a really important philosophy. Leadership is about getting to know that people are individuals and really, really enjoying that. The second thing I wanted to say is how the philosophy and, if you like, the theory of leadership has changed since the 80s, and that has really helped us again as women. Because I can tell you in the 80s, it was pretty horrendous. It was all about management consultants and change consultants, and I noticed on the television the other day they were even making jokes about it nowadays, which is completely fantastic. So I remember in some early years at the National Museum, because I was headhunted all the way with no qualifications, but I became the director of the National Museum of Photography, Film and Television in Bradford. I think to this day, probably because I was the only person who knew about photography who was prepared to go and live in Bradford, because that's where I come from. But it did mean, fantastically, I inherited an amazing museum, and then became assistant director of the Science Museum Group. But we had, and I know this is being filmed, so I shouldn't say it, but we had a particular time, a change of director at the Science Museum Group, and he was really into this management consultancy stuff. And we had these cringe-making bonding exercises where you'd sit round tables throwing each other a ball, and if you accidentally happened to catch the ball, you had to spout out some piece of wisdom about how you would, do all this management and stuff. But the thing was, it was all about theory, and there were processes, and that's sort of how you manage. And for me, that was completely alien, because humans they're emotional beings, aren't they? And actually, I'm much more comfortable in an environment where I follow my own intuition. So I'm interested in people as individuals, and just a bit like Jennifer said, I'm interested in what I can bring to it that is very, very special, and you're not going to find that in a textbook. And I think it takes confidence and a certain amount of maturity to realise that actually your own hunches are always going to be much better than the practicality that's theirs on the table. Now, there are, of course, times when a little bit of theory is very, very helpful. And I always try and make sure that I have on my board, I don't want it just packed with film directors. That's pretty hellish. I mean, you try to explain to Stephen Frears just when he's got off set with Judi Dench what a KPI is, and you're in trouble. So I try and always make sure I've got some people who understand about managing big organisations, and they do tell you extraordinary things. And so I had one guy called Peter Foy who'd actually run McKinsey's. And when things got a bit airy-fairy at the board, I remember we were trying to work something out, and one bit of advice he gave me, which I don't know how much use this is going to be to you at all, but I still find it fascinating, is if you're trying to estimate something or estimate a budget and you don't actually know what the figure is, use your best judgment call and make it up, and 9 times out of 10 you're going to be within 5% of being right. And I think that's really interesting, because actually, again, it shows that you can have all the calculators in the world, you can have all the textbooks in the world, but actually trust your own intuition and your own knowledge, and you will actually find your path there as you go. So be yourself, share your passion. The next thing I'm going to say about leaders is your job is to make things happen. It's as simple as that. And again, Jennifer, you were reflecting this. Stagnating, just isn't an option. Your job is really, really to make things happen. I'm always saying this to my executive team. Look, guys, our job isn't to run the place. It's to make really exciting things happen. Now, I'm the sort of person who's full of a million ideas a day, and in the shower in the morning I've got at least 5 ideas I'm bursting to do before I've got out of the bathroom. And my colleagues at the BFI, they've learnt over the years of ways to control me by the time I get in through the front door, so the most idiotic of the ideas are probably dissipated or been forgotten by the time I get up into the office. But Greg Dyke was my chair, and he taught to me that it's an absolute essential component of leadership is to have ideas, and some will work, as Jennifer said, and some won't, but actually it's really important to make things happen, because people love being led. They love to have this picture painted of a place that we can get to, and we're all going to get there together. And it never ceases to amaze me, even when the chips are really down, I'll look at people, and you're looking at this deficit, and you've got more grant and aid cuts coming from government, and the basement's flooding, and everybody's sitting there looking glum, and I just, come on, we'll get there, it's been done, we'll do it. And they'll look up and look cheerful again, and I haven't got a clue how we're going to unplug the basement or cope with the deficit. But I think having those ideas and having that passion and taking people there is really, really important. The other thing that Greg taught me is that when things go wrong, and they do, don't sit around licking your wounds. You probably have to let people just mend a bit. But he said the smartest business people swerve left, surprise the world, and do something completely different. And I think that's a really clever way of coping with disappointment, because things really, really do go wrong. And that's the other thing with leadership. I think some things go right and some things go wrong. I also want to touch on when things go wrong and that sense of bravery, which again, it's funny, we are echoing quite a lot of the same things here, because that's something that I have learned myself to be brave, because some things go wrong and sometimes you have to do things, or you have to lead an organisation through times that you don't want to have to lead them through, and you know they're not going to like you and you're going to force to do things. So there might be downsizing, there might be redundancies that you don't want to do, or it might be that there's a fantastic department run by people you think are amazing, but you just can't prioritise that activity anymore, and you need to lead the organisation through the change. And I can tell you the absolute bestest way to do that is to stand up in front of them and be yourself, and with absolute integrity tell people why this needs to be done, share with them the fact that you don't like doing it, and because you sort of owe it to them, you know, to be really, really honest with them. I think I spent, in retrospect, if I look back, I think in the early years, particularly at the BFI, because it's quite a complex organisation, or it was, I spent a lot of time trying to not to do that. I'd invent ways where I didn't have to stand up in front of a really quite difficult staff group to begin the early years and just tell them how it was. But now we do it a lot, and I actually love it. We have quarterly meetings, all staff. We celebrate successes. Everybody does presentations, 4 or 5 presentations, and then I do an absolutely open Q&A. I stand on the stage, totally vulnerable, and the rules are anybody can ask me any question, providing it's moral and legal and not too rude, and I will endeavour to answer it. And actually, when things go badly wrong, it's really great because it lets the steam out of the organisation. It's an opportunity. And the other thing is, if people start getting arsey with you, if they know they're going to be made redundant and they're upset, you can empathise publicly with them. And if they start getting really arsey with you, you'll be amazed how the rest of the staff will always rally round to make sure that you feel okay about it. But it helps the organisation get through different things. So I think being brave, being confident and leading from the front is really, really important. So I've been very lucky through my professional life. I'm not going to talk for too much longer because I have been supported all the way through by extraordinary people. And I really wouldn't be here with quite a few people who have challenged my inability to be brave enough. So I remember I was headhunted to run the National Museum in Bradford. And I had 2 very young children. I was a single parent, and I was applying, and then I thought, oh Christ, I really can't do this. I can't move to the other end of the country and run a national museum. Are you kidding? And it was a fantastic man called Colin Ford who ran the museum, and he rang me up and he said, why haven't you applied? And I said, oh Colin, I can't really run a national museum, honestly. I'm just running this little organisation down here. And there was a silence, and he said, that's not your decision to make, Amanda. That's for the trustees to decide. And in other words, I thought, that's how a man thinks. He gives the responsibility to somebody else. So remember that when you go for a job. It's not your responsibility. It's really good. Anyway, I'm just going to finish with one last sort of little thing. So at the BFI, to make more money, we don't have offices anymore. We don't even have desks. We have agile working because we wanted to squash 6 floors of staff onto 3 floors so we could let the other floors out, bring in lots of money to invest in all our cultural programs. And I didn't know until about 6 weeks afterwards that it had happened, that there'd been this sort of sweepstake running around the BFI as to how long I would last without an office. I absolutely love it. I am completely liberated. I'm down amongst the girls and the boys, and we have these refectory tables. It's all very super and very trendy. But in the days when I did have a desk, I had 2 fossils on the desk. I absolutely love them. One from Barnsley and one from somewhere in America, actually. But these fossils they dated like 100 million years. They're 100 million years old, and there they were sitting on my desk. And I always had them there, A, because they were really, really beautiful, but also because it really puts things into proportion. So you're sitting there worrying about deficits, or somebody who's pissed you off, somewhere else, or you've got a problem with the board, or weight of work, or your child's been, expelled from school or something. But you have got a fossil there, which is 100 million years old, and it just puts things in proportion. And I'd sit there for a minute and I'd think, I wonder what fingerprint as a leader I'm going to leave on this earth. So I just leave you with that thought. Thank you.
Oh, it's getting hard to say anything fresh or new. I'm sat there thinking, no, she said that, okay. No, she said that, okay. So I'm left with about 3 things. I feel sorry for, exactly. Yeah, I'll leave you one, yeah, okay. So, hi, I think, I wonder if I can do this without my glasses, yes. I think one of the things where I consider myself lucky is that I have what I call a really good bog standard background. And that means that no matter what I do, no matter who I speak to, and there are some people sort of say, oh, you're this or you're that, or gosh, are you this or are you that? I kind of think, actually, no, I'm Hilary from Dulwich. And it's the bit of Dulwich that you don't know, actually, because when I say Dulwich, you've probably gone to the village. You've gone to West Dulwich, haven't you, with the leafy bit? I don't come from that part. I come from another part, but I don't always say that, depending on which company I'm in. I have options. But the key thing for me is to understand exactly who I am, exactly who is engaging in whatever conversation I'm having. And that, for me, is one thing that's always been really important. So I'm a girl from South London. I'm a child of Windrush parents, and thankfully they did give me a passport, otherwise heavens alone knows what we would be doing today. I think I'm also very fortunate in that I entered the arts through school. I entered the arts when schools did take young people from southeast London to the theatre. So I was very familiar with the stairs of Sadler's Wells. I could walk up the back stairs, Sadler's Wells. I even was taken to the Opera House. I was brought to culture. Culture was brought to me. And that's so important, and it's one of the reasons why I am totally passionate about the value of the arts within the school environment. Because if you're like me and your parents weren't taking you to museums or to cultural activities on the weekends or anything like that, you would not have had that entry point into the world of the arts, which has absolutely been transformative as I have gone through my career. So we really have to make sure that we get that right. We really have to make sure that if we want a society that is informed and that is culturally literate, or even just goes to see culture, then we have to make sure that we have access points that are open to everyone, not just those who are either in the know or have the resources to buy themselves into the know. I was also lucky in that I got a degree when my parents didn't have to pay for one, because if they had, it's not that they weren't expecting me or that they didn't want, they just literally could not have afforded it. I was very fortunate because, again, in getting that degree, what it said to people who were questioning is, this girl has a brain and she can use it to a certain level. Because sometimes that's what you're being told. It's not what you necessarily have your qualifications in, but what level is it at? And so what that said to other people who perhaps have been skeptical, and funnily enough, I have had people who have been skeptical about me during my life, don't know why. But what that says is she's at this level, and that's been really important when you're walking into avenues that people don't expect you to walk into. I was also very fortunate in that I'm what I call a very lucky person, and I think you're absolutely right if you mix that luck with hard work. because the luck is important. I got lots of breaks in my early career. I happened to be in the Midlands. I was born and grew up in London, but I went to the Midlands to study, and I got perhaps a few more breaks there than I might have had in the kind of mix of London with everyone coming in. So I was very lucky, but I had to mix that luck with hard work. It is not something that we can be shy about. I'm not saying that I've had to work harder than anyone else, but anyone who understands our work that we do within culture as being light or fluffy or lacking anything really doesn't understand what it takes to do what we do and to get where we want to be. So that luck meant that I was an art form officer for my second job. I was an Arts Council director, age 32, and somehow or the other I managed to keep my mind and my body together long enough to gain some experience. So that was really important. I got some experience early on that I think has held me in good stead as I've gone through the rest of my career. One of the things that they say about women is that we like to have our qualifications, whereas men prefer to have experience. And I don't want to run the stereotypes here, but we did some research when I was running the cultural leadership program that actually said women sort of want to ensure that they're qualified to be able to do the role, whereas men will kind of go, well, I've done a bit of that, so yeah, I'll go for it. So we need to be careful not to overly reward women for their qualifications or men for their experience or their attempt at experience. We need to be able to balance both those things. But when I saw that piece of research, I thought to myself, gosh, that is me. I am qualified to do so many things. But it's because I was so scared that people would say, well, why should we give you that role? Well, why should you do that? Why are you the person to do that? So I just kept getting those qualifications just in case anyone asked. And you wouldn't believe it, but one of the qualifications that I worked so hard for was an MBA because I really wanted the stamp that says this person can do things. And someone asked me, is that an MBA as in Master of Business Administration? At which point I went, yeah, well, I won't say what I went. But I thought, really? Really? You're questioning what that means? What's happening here? And this is where I get to the issue of not just gender, but class. And some of you might have noticed that I'm also a black woman. Yeah, I know, it's not obvious. You walk into that space, your name's Hilary, Carty, I don't give many clues as to what's going to come. You know, you're lucky because this is the Facebook, the Twitter generation, so you can just look me up and you get to see. But back in 1994, when I was walking into spaces with my name, people did not know what to expect. And there are so many times I do not gist when they have walked right past me and spoken to someone who's behind me who doesn't have the same hue as I have. And that poor embarrassed person has had to say, no, 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 that's Hilary. And I kind of go, do I not look like a Hilary? How does Hilary? So we have to learn to deal with those things. I mean, those are some of the experiences that I have. You will have different things, whether it's because you look young, or it's because, you know, you might be blonde, or there are other things. We have to determine how we're going to react when we get those experiences. We can't necessarily judge what people do, but we can judge. We are in control of how we respond to it. And that's a really, really important lesson that I learned early, is what's my response going to be? That's really important for us. That's the bit that we can control. So one of the great things about my career when I look back at my CV is that it looks fantastic in reverse. It looks kind of strategic and planned. You know, you look at it and you kind of go, well, that follows that, follows that. But that was just not how it was at all. I wish that I have often wished that I was more planned and that I was, you know, a 5-year X, Y, and Z. I'm not that kind of person. But what I have been able to do in terms of those choices is to just have a look at it and say, what does that do for me? Is that a lateral move, but it's worth it for the different skills? Is that a diagonal move, but it gets me into that new field that I'm not yet into? Or is it that straightforward vertical move, which, yeah, my mum will be proud of and all of my friends will congratulate me? Not every single move that I've made or that we can make has necessarily to be straight upwards. Sometimes that lateral move for experience, that diagonal move for new context is as vital as those ones that sort of say, obviously, progression. And I've made a number of those diagonal moves. So if you do look at my career, sometimes I have moved to the side, because for me, getting that breadth has always been important. The last area that I touch on, I just picked up on Amanda's point about motherhood. Now, you see, they didn't send me the memo about hiding your children in a cupboard. And I had my children when I was at one of the peaks of my career. And I didn't even know that this was a problem. It was years later when people kept pointing out to me how I had been pregnant. And I'm thinking, yeah. Or how I had brought one of my children to something on a Saturday. I'm thinking, it's a Saturday, for heaven's sake. I got the memo about hiding them in a cupboard during Monday to Friday. But for me, the issue of being the person that you want to be in the whole, in the round, is really important. And having the children was fantastic, not just in terms of getting balanced children, but in balancing me. It's really fantastic. You go home, you've got your high heels on, you've got your shoulder pads on, you've just left ex-royal, whatever, chief exec, etc., and your son says, now, Mum, do you know what happened today in the playground? And you just have to metaphorically and physically kick off the heels, lose whatever, and get to the playground. And that's been so good for me to kind of keep me real and keep me grounded, because I have just had to juggle all of those things and fight that same fight of being in one space no matter where you think you should be. But I remember loving those times when I just had to say, actually, the person who you are is a mum, and this is what's happening. There are so many years I began to hate Easter because I just never remembered that blooming Easter bonnet thing that you have to make. And I was always the parent who came in with some sort of purple something because it was the scarf I had. In the end, I did sort it out. I bought some Easter chicks and I just put them in the cupboard. So for about 4 years, my boys, I have 2 boys, went to school with Easter chick bonnets because at least I had the chicks. So I thought I'd just highlight 3 factors as I wrap up. 3 things that in my background that I think have been really helpful. The first is that, as I said, I've grown up in what I would call an average background. But one of the things that stands out for me is that there were lots of expectations around me. I grew up in an environment of high expectation. It's not onerous, it isn't burdensome, but it was there. I did have people who were looking at me and talking to me about what it is that was happening, and who were asking me those questions that began to look at what do you want to do and how are you going to get there. And that, I think, is really important. What are we asking of our young people? What are we asking of them in terms of their aspiration? Because learning to aspire and then work to achieve is something that you can grow those muscles. You can grow that muscle about looking far and then looking at the journey and the steps there. The second factor is those people who ask me questions. Nowadays we call them mentors, but when I was growing up, they were just people who were interested in what I was doing. They were people who were further ahead of me, who would come and walk alongside me, and who would just kind of nudge me or put an arm around me and just made sure that I kept going when sometimes I wanted to fall back or hide or just disappear. And there were people that I could celebrate my successes with. So the issue of mentors or just people who are on your side is so critical. And one of the things that I try to do now is to make sure that I offer that same service to people who are coming through, because it's so important to make sure that we help each other, that we use our stories and our experiences to support everyone going forward. And the final thing is about knowing yourself. Now, there are parts of myself that are locked in a cupboard under the stairs, right at the back, because those aren't the bits that I really should still possess. So I've hidden them as far away as possible. But I know that they are part of me. I know that actually I am not perfect. I can't ask myself to be perfect, smart all the time, brilliant all the time, get it right all the time. But what I can do is understand where that might be coming from. What's happened in that experience? Why has that triggered that kind of response? So I've done far too many personality tests and psychometric tests, far too many. But the thing is, what they do is they give you data. They give you little points to have a look and say, is that really me? What's happening there? Because understanding who you are is so fundamental to being the leader that you want to be. And I think that it is important to understand your values. It is important to understand the things that you stand for. It is important that you can set yourself next to the person and say, that's what they're doing, but this is me. So I'm now 6 months into a new job. It's a big job. I'm following someone I admire greatly. And people often ask me, gosh, you're stepping into her shoes. And I'm going, no, I bought my own shoes, you know. I bought my own. And I have a big foot. And so I have bought big shoes for this big job. And I am standing in them. So knowing myself means that I'm bringing me into this role. And I am absolutely admiring everything that has gone to make this a really fantastic program that I'm working with. But actually, I am in the space, so I am negotiating, navigating, collaborating, working with the people around me, and that means that there will be difference, but I am present in the moment. So looking specifically at the issue of gender, I would say that as a woman, it's been most important for me to understand myself. It's been really important for me to understand and own my ambitions, to own my aspirations, and to not be daunted by the fact that some people don't know that I grew up in a household of high expectations, and they're surprised by what I want to do and what I want to be. That's theirs. This is me. I have witnessed sexism, I've experienced racism, I've handled unconscious biases all throughout my career. Those things are unnecessary, they are unhelpful, but they don't have to define your life. For me, the challenge and the opportunity is to take my experiences and to turn them into learning experiences for others. That's why I work in leadership development, because I want to use the grit of the experiences that I've had and turn them into opportunities for others to learn, to be better, and to do better. It's a great job. Thank you.
So I, of course, have the worst position of following these three amazing women, so I'm going to sing. So, no. I'm here actually because I saved Michael Hurst's life. I don't know if any of you know of Michael Hurst, the great Renaissance scholar. When I came to the Courtauld for my interview, he and I walked across the street, and he walked onto an oncoming taxi, and I grabbed him and pulled him off the street and got accepted at the Courtauld. So always save a man is my leadership lesson. When I was a child, and I sort of reached my end of school in the early 80s, and I had those dreaded moments when my father would say, let's go have coffee. And I knew he was going to ask me where I was going to go to university, what I was going to study, what I was going to do with my life. And it was awful. And I realized completely in hindsight, I didn't know it at the time, that I struggled because I had no female role models, working role models in my life. My mother didn't really work outside the home in a career fashion. On television, Mary Tyler Moore was the only woman with a career that you saw in popular TV. Most of my friends and my relatives, the women, didn't work outside the home. And so I couldn't picture myself doing anything. And so I really had a hard time figuring that out. And a friend of my parents was the American ambassador to East Germany. And so when my father said that to me once, I said, I know, I'm going to go into political science. And again, I only realized in hindsight that it was because of this woman, Roseanne. And political science is the most absurd field for me. I have no interest in politics, and quickly got there and realized it. And I took a Greek archaeology class for fun and ended up switching my career. So I feel really passionately about the importance of young women and young girls seeing female role models out there. Except I once did a session for little kids in an elementary school about careers, and it was a classroom divided in two, and I was facing one direction, and there was a nurse facing the other direction with her students. And I'm talking about museums and collection storage and all these things, and the nurse had bags of blood. All of my students were turned around in their chairs, and I called my husband, I'm not doing these anymore, it's too hard. But after I started my professional life, I had the great, incredible privilege of studying here at the Courtauld, and it really was a privilege. I ended up with lots of student loans to pay back and ended up in Fresno, California, in a place I still remember the guidebook when I first opened it up. I'm going to Fresno? And the guide said, to people in Fresno, culture is something that lives in the back of your throat. And I was going to work in a museum in Fresno. So I started my career there. But I've really reflected that I've had two professional role models in my life in terms of bosses that I've worked for. And one is an incredible man named John Reeve. He was the head of education at the British Museum here in London. And John taught me about leadership in leading as a person. And one of the wonderful things John did that you could never do in America, you probably can't do in Britain anymore either, is he had a bottle of sake in his desk and two little sake cups. And every now and then, he'd go find somebody around the building and sit down with them and put the sake. Sake is perfect because you only drank a little bit. It wasn't like you were sitting there drinking a bottle of beer together. And he would just talk to me about who I am, who I wanted to be. And at that point, I was, the most junior of staff members, and it made me feel so important and listened to. And so in so many ways, John was a role model. After I moved back to the States and went to Fresno, I had a male boss, and I won't name him, who was one of the worst leaders I've ever seen. And I learned just as much from him because I learned what not to do. One of the things he would do is anytime a female member of staff like me would come into his office and tell him something he didn't want to hear, he'd put his arms behind his head and start flexing his muscles. And you knew that he didn't want that direction, you had to go change. He didn't last very long. He wasn't the right fit for the organization, and the board hired me. I was 28 years old, and I want to sort of finish my remarks with you in a bit of a different direction from these three remarkable women, which is much more for those of you starting careers to tell you about playing the game. And the deck is stacked against female leaders in our world today, and I'm really sorry about it. And we need all of you to fight and work at it. But one of the ways you need to do that is to study what's happening. Study the way that men interview. Men interview differently than women do. Play the game. I always wear a skirt if I'm going for an interview, not pants. They have these expectations, and while you might want to be yourself in those situations, you're up against a male competition in which they define leadership in male terms. And I still remember when Sarah Palin got the nomination to run for vice president, with John McCain, the New York Times had an article which said, oh, thank God, gender equality has finally been achieved because a profoundly mediocre woman has finally achieved prominence. Normally women have to be so much better than every other. And one thing I have learned in my career is the way that our culture defines leadership in male terms. And there's a recent article just within the last couple of weeks in the New York Times which had a whole group of individuals, men and women, draw a picture of a leader. And overwhelmingly, the majority of both men and women drew a man. And if they didn't draw a man, if they drew something that was gender neutral, when they described it, they used he to describe the leader. Like only a couple of people drew a woman. It's this fixed idea we have about leadership. And I've spoken widely about my sort of pet peeve, which is the term gravitas. And now that I've mentioned it, I'm going to ruin it for you. Every time you see it, you're going to understand. But the term gravitas, particularly in the art museum world, is particularly used, or often used, as the most important quality for a museum director. They have to have gravitas. If you look up gravitas in any dictionary, almost all of the definitions are with a male pronoun. He walked into the room and commanded the room because of his gravitas. Occasionally you'll find the negative. She didn't have any gravitas, therefore she didn't get the part. It's always female. And so gravitas, this idea of solemnity, grandeur, intelligence, is something associated. It's code word for male. And yet, when museum boards are sitting around the table deciding who they're going to hire, they say, we want female candidates. And then they're looking, they say, well, she didn't have any gravitas, so, let's talk about him. And so it's that sort of unintended bias of exclusion. And so study the way that men act and make sure that you come in that room with gravitas. And right now, the Fortune 500 companies in the United States, only 6.4% is female. I mean, just think about that. That's 35 women in Fortune 500 companies. One of the 35 is a Latina, and one is an Asian American. There's not a black woman in Fortune 500 companies. In the United States Congress, only 20% of our elected officials are female. And among American museums, almost 50% of museum directors in American museums are women, so that's great. But there's definitely this feeling in our field that, it's okay now. It's 50%. But of the 30 largest art museums in America, there are only 2 women, me and one other woman, who run these large museums. And again, in this world today, boards mean to hire women. They really do. It's the unintended bias of how they define leadership. So my advice is to do your homework, play the game, because you're up against that kind of competition. So dress the part, act the part, and hopefully we don't have to look at candidates like Sarah Palin as meaning gender equity. I want to finish by saying again what a incredible privilege, and I always use the word privilege, it was to study at the Courtauld. And I have worked with so many incredible people, and I especially want to thank Sonnet and the rest of the organizers of this evening for their support and for really fostering future career growth for women in the field. So thank you. Thanks. Fantastic. Thank you. I'd like to thank all of the speakers for some really interesting, entertaining, and illuminating comments on their own personal paths to leadership. And I think what's really remarkable is there are quite a lot of themes in common, and I'm sure that that's generating questions among the audience as we've been kind of going along. And we have a little bit of time for questions now, and I'd like to just kick off by asking the group about this question about ambition, because one of our speakers said, I think it was Hilary, said, own your ambitions. And I'm just wondering about how you feel about articulating that over the years to people, and whether you feel like there's a way of being openly ambitious that's worked for your careers. I don't know if you
Since I went last, I'm going to go first this time. When I studied here, Joanna Woodall was my supervisor, and I'll never forget Joanna she gave me lots of great life advice, but one of the things she said to me once, she wagged her finger at me and she said, Kaywin, you are always climbing ladders. And that was, as I was entering my PhD, she said, you're at the top now, stop climbing ladders. And I think about that all the time because I do feel like I'm always climbing ladders. But in the same theme of what I said before, I was recently on a conference call of the nominating committee for the Association of Art Museum Directors, the top 250 art museum directors in the United States, Canada, and Mexico. And we were talking about candidates for the Board of Trustees. And one woman's name was under consideration, and a lovely man, I like him very much, but a director of another museum said, oh no, she's really ambitious. She used to work for me, and she just always, and I thought, who isn't ambitious in this group?
Yeah.
But it was, immediately seen as a negative for her, but she got on the board.
Okay, thank you. And I also just wanted to ask Hilary too about, because you have a bit of a unique role in that you are a leader of an organization that is training other leaders. And I just wonder, in terms of what you've seen in the 6 months that you've been in your new role, about what leadership looks like for this current next generation. Is there any themes that are coming out now, or any preoccupations that you notice that you might reflect on?
Well, the timing is really good because we're just currently in the midst of interviews for the next cohort of fellows. So I'm actually seeing 5 people a day, 3 days a week for 6 weeks. Breathe. But one of the fascinating things with that is that you get to have conversations with people who are in leadership roles, very often in mid-career. And there are a number of themes, it's still early days, but there are a number of themes that are coming through. And diversity is a theme. There is huge concern about diversity and about the strategies. And as you say, you would have thought 20 years ago we would somehow or the other have done it by now, but we certainly haven't. But what I enjoy is that this is a fronted agenda. This is not a kind of a discrete agenda for a few people or a woe is me. People are being quite overt and upfront about that. One of the issues that we were reflecting on today is people are being quite niche. And I'm not sure that that's a good thing. People are being quite niche quite early in their careers, and they are narrowing their focus around a geographical space or an area of provision, and not taking that wider view, not getting context and alternatives. And that concerns me because it narrows your conversation, it narrows your perspectives. So that thing of looking out and understanding that wider, juggling with the wider cultural sector and the sector beyond culture is something that I'm starting to pick up.
And not specializing too early, perhaps. And any questions now, maybe from the audience? Yes, in the back.
Hi, I have a question to Hilary and Jennifer and Amanda with regards to what Kaywin said, that we have to play the game and learn how to do it. Because I feel like that's the one thing I really don't want to do anymore. I really believe that we're going to change the game and the future belongs to women. And I feel like there should be a new set of rules that should apply to men and women. And I don't think that women, should wear the skirt to the interview so, she looks more feminine or whatever. Because I feel like we're done doing this. Or at least, I hope we're done doing this.
Can I jump in to just say, get the job and then change the world? You can't change it unless you get the job.
I'll just come in there because there is a link to the previous question, which I was sort of quite glad I didn't have to answer, because this notion of ambition, in my head, I didn't have my career, my trajectory mapped out. And I don't even know if I had ambition. That sounds insane, because of course I did. But I always have ambition for the organisation I work for. Now, I'm nervous of saying that because people say, oh, women always say that. But it's the truth. The reason I'm in the arts is because it's an altruistic thing, get really excited about it. And I sometimes think it is duplicitous because I say I'm not ambitious personally. I'm very ambitious for the organisation I work for and with and for my colleagues, and in a way that's a sort of female way of saying, yes, I'm damned ambitious. So I think if we play, do you know what I mean? So I think there is a playing the game, but playing your own game, you know, owning up to this is how we do it as women, and rather than knocking ourselves and saying, oh, that's, you're a woman, you would say that.
Super. Other questions? Yes, in the back as well.
I was just interested to hear all your thoughts on the concept of quotas of women in leadership positions, positive or negative. I'm quite undecided, so I'd like to hear.
The idea of quotas.
Could you expand that a bit? What do you mean in terms?
So, I guess, from vague knowledge, there are countries in the world that are looking at implementing quotas for women in boards or in leadership positions or museums or government roles or whatever. So I think Iceland might be doing some of that. But there isn't anything for the UK as far as I'm aware.
Yeah.
Just your thoughts kind of thing.
Yeah.
Well, now I'd love to answer this actually. Sorry, I'm not trying to grab things. Is because I have been shouted at panels because I don't believe in quotas, but I absolutely believe in targets. And the reason I don't believe in quotas is that I don't ever want to be in a position of anything because of a quota. And in the world I am, where we fund a lot of films, but we absolutely have targets. And actually, if you have a target, it changes the world, sort of, anyway. So I think there's a distinction between a quota and a target. That's any use.
Yeah, I like that answer. Yeah.
Any other questions? Oh, sorry.
The other women leaders agree with that point of view, that targets are fine, you don't need quotas?
I don't mind what it takes. When it's shifted.
Yeah.
And I think it's different situations, different organisations. In some organisations, there is such a kind of lack of agenda on this that it will require a quota in order to get through. In other spaces, a target is sufficient. I will not bind myself to this. I think we look at what the need is and you do what's necessary, because if we don't start being proactive, we'll be here in 50 years' time with the same conversation. I'm kind of enough already.
And actually, I'm with that. I think the thing that worries me most is how many things are inherently within us that we don't realise that we carry. I was watching a ridiculous film on Netflix the other night, anything to switch off after a long day, and it was a silly film, but where absolute crazy notion where gender balance completely flipped on its head. It was a French film, I can't remember the title of it, and I was watching it and kind of enjoying it. I had a glass of wine, it was fine, but there was a moment in it where in this new world where women ruled everything and men all wore pink, and it was a completely reversal of every single stereotype you could think. They thought it through very carefully, and there was a poker game, and these women were playing the poker game, and she had the winning hand, the queen. And it really threw me for a minute, because I hadn't thought of that. I hadn't thought that when we're even playing cards, the man is the winner. And that is something that is so deeply ingrained within me that it took me a minute in that film. I missed the next bit of the dialogue because I hadn't realised how much, even though I am the biggest feminist I know, because I look in mirrors a lot, that I hadn't realised that. I hadn't realised that I'd forgotten that king beats queen. Yeah. Isn't that crazy? And so, and people will, I've sat in so many meetings about this. That's why I just paused for a minute on it, because you get into the worry about positive discrimination and actually what messages that's sending. And but actually it's much, much simpler than that. As you were saying, Hilary, if there's a problem, do everything you can to fix it. If you can catch people out when they're making mistakes, don't embarrass people. Nobody's more right than anybody else. Don't let's try and humiliate people, but let's try and correct things when there are mistakes made or assumptions that are voiced that actually speak to a prejudice that we didn't even realise we were carrying because we had it from the minute we were born. So that would be my answer on that too. If it's needed, then yes, and let's not chalk ourselves out of it by then trying to bring justice and fairness back into the mix again. Oh well, actually, then who are we discriminating against?
And also,
it depends on the issue.
You will find that perhaps legislation is not necessary. A lot of the work is done by informal professional organizations, like, for example, here in London, Museum Detox is doing some great work in broadening the question of diversity in the arts. In the private equity sector, we had someone at the last event who volunteers her time for an organization called Level 20, trying to raise the number of women leaders in the private equity world. And these are, as I say, kind of informal professional organizations that are trying to, through networking and events and consciousness raising, trying to kind of shift the needle. So, and I think that other areas, organizations in the arts in the UK, like OITA, I think is doing some good work in that area regarding gender parity. So,
Can I just, there's something that just came to me before as well, which I was trying to add it up in my head really quickly, and I was astonished by the result that I came up with. I've done a lot of interviews, and I've interviewed a lot of people, and I just tried to think for a minute, how many female candidates challenged the salary? And I actually can't think of one. And how many of the male candidates pushed to get the salary? They knew their worth, and they knew that that is your window to get the salary, otherwise you're stuck with the salary you're on, just with your inflationary increase for forever. And actually, I cannot at the moment think of one female candidate who pushed me on their salary.
do you have any advice for those of us in the room who might be in the position of negotiating? What's your impression of, like, the script?
Because, well, I have pushed for salary increases a couple of times and had it held over me as well. Or, had it brought up in a jokey fashion afterwards. Wasn't that, but you were a bit pushy, we knew what you were like. But I think it's keeping it simple. Just keeping it really simple, really direct. Don't talk too much. Just say, actually, no, I think that this should be the correct salary for me in this
I think there was
role, and that's what I'd accept.
Thank you. And I think there was another question in the front. Yeah, Sarah?
Hi, it's for everyone on the panel. I'm really interested in the gap between perceptions of leadership from the outside and when you were coming up in your careers, and then when you end up in that club and you're doing it. And the parallel for me is management, that moving into a management role, I just want to go back and apologise to every manager I've had. The expectations that you place on them, and then you're the one at the end of those expectations. It's like, what's that shift been for you? Is there anything that really kind of strikes you now that you're in the club, you're going, wow, okay, I hadn't thought about that?
One response, and again, I think this is actually quite female, but I'm very struck by the complete drain and exhaustion I feel day in, day out, taking care of everybody. I spend all day at work soothing board members and whatever their little issues are. Staff member, all I do is take care of other people. And when I was single, I used to go home and look at my cat and say, what are you going to do for me? Which of course was nothing. Now I at least have a husband who, and when I tell people that, they're like, oh, take bubble baths, go to the gym. And it's actually not the time issue I'm talking about. I'm talking about the mental strain of always looking after everybody else. And it's draining, and I don't have an answer to it.
Stunned silence. Silence of agreement, perhaps.
I think for me, the complexity is one of the things that's really quite stark of trying to juggle all of the different things that you have to do in that leadership role of both sort of caring but being decisive, taking risk but not looking risky, being innovative but not so much that you destabilize, and just the complexity of it all, and trying to keep it all balanced in a way, and judging when to push forward which elements of it.
I've got a question about hard work and work-life balance. And so when I had kids, I didn't particularly care if I had kids or not, but my wife wanted kids, so we had kids. And I thought, well, if we're going to have kids, I'm going to take it seriously. And so I went I'm not going to be the dad who is, and so, which would have been very easy. My wife's Italian, so my parents used to joke, I was brought up as a bit of a new man, and my wife was brought up to care for a family, really. And my parents used to joke that, it was the two of us were both homemakers. Anyway, I decided to go down to 4 days a week, and I looked after my kids every Wednesday. So I couldn't do things on a Wednesday unless they actually came with, which was pretty useless when they were preschool. And I was adamant about that, and there was no childcare on a Wednesday, there was no family nearby to do it, so I couldn't work Wednesdays. But when I did that, I made a clear decision that that was a trade-off against career progression. And there is this whole work hard thing, which is another version of this, and I think that there's a growing culture of working hard, being seen to work hard, doing more than your 35 hours. I mean, in America, that's a normal thing. In France, 35 hours is much more normal, but we're moving more towards America. And I just wanted to ask you 2 questions, really. I suppose a bit of honesty about, you can't have it all, and just a bit of a reflection on that. You can have both, but, you can have both to the fullest extent. And also, this question about, one of my mantras with the staff who report to me is that I stop them working too hard, because I think ultimately it's not good for them and it's not actually good for the organisation. So it's about sort of hard work and moderating what you can achieve because you've got a life, I suppose.
So one of my great heroes is Nora Ephraim, and I don't know if you know that great speech she made at Wellesley College, and she said, you can have it all, it's going to be messy, but you can have it all. And I really firmly believe that you can have it all on your own terms, but just not on somebody else's terms. You can't be the size 0 with 15 kids and the big house and the mansion and have your leadership role and also do lots of humanitarian work and be an astronaut.
You can, but she's a cow.
Yeah. She's got no friends.
Yes.
But I think about that messy a bit, because I love that. She said you can have it all, but it's going to be messy, and it comes in waves, doesn't it? You're never the same person. It's another thing that she talked about. You're never the same person at any given time, 1 year to the next. You're never I reconnected with somebody tonight that I knew when I was 3 years working in Bath, and Belinda's here this evening. I haven't seen you for a year. It's lovely to see you, Belinda. And it just reminded me, in seeing you, I just lit up inside, and I remembered Bath, Jenny. I worked for 3 years in Bath as director of the Holborn Museum. My husband didn't come with me, so I lived in Bath, and I spent my whole time telling people that, because people ask me all the time, but you didn't, so he didn't come with you, you're not living with your husband, you're living in Bath without him. And it was just this constant conversation, and I refined my ways of giving a shorthand, it's great, love each other more than ever, he used to travel a lot, it's fine, we're used to it. And it just was this thing that I learned how to talk about it, but that was Bath Jenny, that was me, and I took 3 years out because I knew I wanted to be a museum director. In fact, I'd gone for a job as a curator, and afterwards the director of that gallery called me in for a chat, and she said, stop going for jobs as curators, you should be a director. And she's fantastic, her name's Perdita Hunt, she's a wonderful woman. I then thought, well, I do, and in order to do that I might have to make a sacrifice and go for a job somewhere else. And I lived in Bath and did that change. But it doesn't mean I haven't, in my mind, got it all. It just meant that at that period for 3 years I lived apart from Stephen, and that was okay. I suppose when it comes in that idea of looking back over your CV, it makes a lot of sense in retrospect. It's a lot easier to talk about it now. It was great, I loved Bath. But it's a funny thing, isn't it, that concept of whose concept is it anyway, having it all? I don't have children, I've got a bunny rabbit. I love my bunny rabbit very much. And people do ask me about children quite a bit. I'm 38. People ask me about it, and I wonder, do I have a responsibility to talk about that to people, or is that deeply private? Is that my thing? I don't know. It's an interesting one, and I've had different people come to me at different times in my life to talk about it within their context, and I just think probably just being really truthful in that moment about who you are at that moment is the best that we could do.
Yeah, thank you.
I think, sorry, I just wanted to reflect on because I think it's a really great question. And I was sort of sitting here thinking about, how it had worked with me, and I think it was definitely messy. But actually, the scary bit was when the children left home, and I didn't have to have that discipline. I actually think I turned into, it became everything. And I always joke, in a way I've got grandchildren now, 5, just a quick boast. So I don't have any time at all. In fact, I say child-free weekends. But actually, the other way around, I actually think, when you say having it all, I think actually it keeps your life balanced. And I think, for me it did anyway.
Well, I had my children later on in my career, and I had some seriously unhealthy practices in my early career where I would just do whatever it took in terms of working hard, working long hours, but it was a choice that I made, and whether they were real hurdles or I saw them as hurdles, I just decided that I had to jump these things, and so I just put absolutely everything into it. If I were looking back at my young self now, I'd go ease up. I would just say, don't take it all quite so seriously.
I think that's good advice for all of us, actually. And yes, another question here.
Well, thank you all so much for speaking tonight. I just wanted to ask, about roadblocks in your career, if you've had any, because you all are so fabulous. But I wanted to know how, like either a change in job or a change in type of job, or you didn't get the job you want. How did you guys deal with that, work through that?
I had lots of roadblocks and challenges, and when I was 32 and had been a director for almost 5 years, I interviewed for another museum, and the board chair in the interview looked at me and he said, "You are far too young and far too female for a curator to ever report to you." And being an American, the first thing I thought was, "Oh, I should get a lawyer."
Dead right.
But to my earlier point about playing the game, I knew that that would not get me anywhere at that point in my career. So I went on my merry way, found my way somewhere else. Now I get to talk about it. I didn't then because I didn't have the position to do so. But I feel, you can tell, I feel so passionately that we have to get women into leadership roles so we can redefine what leadership looks like. And the earlier question about quotas, I was thinking about how in the U.S. government has recently voted to take away a lot of healthcare rights for women. Of course, constant abortion under threat, birth control rights, mammogram screen, you name it, because it's 80% male making those decisions. And if it was 50% women around the table, they'd be making different decisions. How can we all let the world continue to be defined so narrowly? So I just feel so strongly that we have to get in these positions and change what leadership looks like. And again, I'm not saying that one is better than the other, but we all know that broad representation and diversity is the future of the world that we live in, and that we're better organizations the more diverse we are. And so that's what we all need to work for.
And actually, I think it's a really good thing. Perhaps one of the biggest responsibilities we've got, I was talking about leaving that fingerprint behind, is to make sure we've got succession behind us. We should be really nurturing those, I'm sure we all are, but in our organisations, do you know what I mean, to make sure that they're, we're bringing them up.
Yeah. And that we make things as easy as possible as well.
Yeah.
Somebody said the other day, this is a bit silly, forgive me, but somebody said, what does female leadership for you? And I said, it's tampons in the toilets. It's free tampons in the toilets. Because what a crazy world where actually that isn't just a natural thing that organisations just put free tampons in the toilets. And it's just that thing that people don't, and it was only an idea that came to me in a meeting at the Holborn Museum in Bath when I just had the worst period pain in a senior leadership team meeting, and our head of education at the Holborn said, "Are you okay?" And actually it just happened that day that the guys on the team weren't there, and I thought it's okay to say it. I said, "Oh, just, period pain." And she let out a little squeak, and she said, "Our director has periods." It was so nice, but it reminded me of that fact, because you just get over your period pain, don't you? You just pass. I took my finals at the Courtauld Institute when I was on my period. You remember, because you know how it affects you, and you know how you get over it, and you know how you don't let it show, you don't let people know. And actually it was such a reminder, and I think it was because of Christina saying that day, that then it came to me, put those things in the toilets. Because also at the Holborn Museum, I always used to have to go downstairs to go to the loo, and if I had my handbag with me, people would say, "Oh, you're going home early?" And just that conversation is not one that staff, don't trip staff up with having to have those conversations. Make it easy for women.
Funny.
And then it's just like breathing, isn't it, to be a woman in the workplace. So that's tampons in the toilets.
That's brilliant.
It'll be my first leadership decision when I go back to the office.
Well, I know that we don't want to end this conversation because it's so enjoyable and illuminating and fun and funny and all that mixed together. I did notice that my boss, the director of the V&A, was here earlier, but magically he seems to have disappeared before the period conversation. So, but no, seriously, I do want to send my sincere thanks to a fantastic panel for being open, direct, honest, and bringing the conversation to a whole new level. Your personal stories to paths to leadership are really interesting, insightful, and I'm sure that the audience will agree with me. We've learned a tremendous amount this evening. So I'd like to send a huge thanks to all of you for giving up your evening and joining us here tonight. Thank you very much.
I'm Alixe, I'm head of research here, and I just want to take this final opportunity to thank Sonnet, who's been the mastermind behind this whole series and has given us the opportunity to have some really wonderful, sometimes quite difficult, but always very enlarging conversations. And like tonight, I think they've all really helped us, I think, to live in the world as it is while also struggling for a better one. So thank you so much, Sonnet, and also to all of our inspirational speakers tonight. Now, a glass of room temperature white wine downstairs for everyone. So thank you all.